Chapter 1045. Suddenly, Wu-Ming pressed the black origin soil against his heart. Thump. Thump. In an instant, Wu-Ming's heart let out a clear sound that spread throughout the entire root. Then Wu-Ming showed a pained expression. Lord Wu-Ming. Enkidu was so scared that he quickly held Wu-Ming. Lilin, I'm fine. Wu-Ming's pained expression eased a little, and he no longer seemed to be in so much pain. However, this was only because Wu-Ming didn't want Enki to worry. He forced himself to relax his furrowed brows because of the pain. In fact, the pain coming from his heart was too much for Wu-Ming to bear. Why is it so painful? Wu-Ming wailed in his heart. This was not much less painful than when Wu-Ming was blown up by the explosion caused by Gidia detonating the black origin soil. Back then, Wu-Ming had instantly transferred his consciousness out of his body, so he did not suffer much damage. But this time, Wu-Ming could be said to be enduring pain that was comparable to that time. This was double the pain of his soul and body. It could not be helped. The black origin soil had a restraining effect on Wu-Ming, and it was much more painful than a sword piercing his body. Streams of black origin soil flowed from Wu-Ming's heart to the platform like water droplets falling on a red-hot iron plate. The black origin soil that fell on the platform instantly evaporated. This was the manifestation of the black origin soil being eliminated by the root's defense mechanism. As long as the black origin soil left Wu-Ming's body, it would be eliminated by the root's defense mechanism. At this moment, Wu-Ming's hand was still pressed against his heart to prevent more black origin soil from flowing out and being wasted. Wu-Ming had to slowly wait for the black origin soil to completely enter his body. However, the pain was unbearable. Wu-Ming's brows, which he had forced to relax in order to not worry Enkidu, were now tightly knitted again, but the process was rather slow. Lil, and you and Kalas stay away from me. Wu-Ming used his free hand to take off Kalas from his head, and threw her into Enkidu's hands. Then he shook off Enkidu's support, turned around, and walked a few steps to put some distance between him and Enkidu. After turning around, his brows furrowed brows instantly, and his facial expression began to distort. It was clear how painful it was. Lord Wu-Ming. Master. Both Enkidu and Kalas even wanted to catch up to Wu-Ming's esco. They knew that Wu-Ming didn't want them to worry, and also didn't want them to be affected by the accident that might happen later. That was why Wu-Ming told Enkidu and Kalas to stay away from him. However, Enkidu and Kalas wouldn't want to stay away from Wu-Ming because of something like this. However, in the next second, a hand landed on Enkidu's shoulder. Enkidu, who was holding Kalas's head, was stunned and immediately turned around. It was Tiamat. Tiamat, who was originally sitting in a daze, stood up and walked behind Enkidu. When she saw Enkidu turn around to look at her, Tiamat let go of Enkidu's shoulder, then walked with her slender legs and slowly walked toward Wu-Ming, who had his back facing them. Child. Son. Tiamat walked behind Wu-Ming and slowly spoke. Although Tiamat still stuttered when she spoke, Tiamat had a beautiful voice. Her voice was extremely beautiful. When Wu-Ming heard it, his furrowed brows relaxed a little. The pain only eased a little, and he didn't feel any change. Therefore, Wu-Ming was still in pain. However, in the next second, the stumbling Wu-Ming clearly felt someone pulling him. In an instant, Wu-Ming fell backward and was embraced by a warm embrace. Tiamat hugged Wu-Ming, who was sitting on the ground, like a mother hugging her child. Wu-Ming, who was leaning back in the embrace, could even clearly feel the elasticity of the two firm balls on his back. But at this moment, Wu-Ming didn't feel anything else in his heart. There was only warmth, as comfortable as being in a mother's embrace. Ever since he could remember, Wu-Ming only had the love of his grandfather. There was no fatherly or motherly love. Even so, Wu-Ming could still feel from Tiamat's embrace that this was indeed a motherly love that Wu-Ming had never felt before. Therefore, Wu-Ming was quite infatuated with this rare motherly love. As a result, Wu-Ming slowly adapted to the pain caused by the black root mud eroding his body from his heart. In other words, Wu-Ming's attention shifted from the pain to the motherly love to ease the pain until he completely ignored the pain. However, Wu-Ming's purpose was not to eliminate the pain, but to try to find the secret of adulthood, when the black root mud caused damage to the body. Therefore, we must be awake. Tiamat seemed to really treat Wu Ming as her own son who needed to be treated wholeheartedly. She even began to help Wu Ming achieve his goal. Tiamat, who was half kneeling behind Wu Ming, hugged Wu Ming tightly. She rested her chin on Wu Ming's head. Her pink starry eyes were filled with longing and love for Wu Ming. She opened her small mouth full of sharp teeth and slowly sang a song. This simple song was exactly the same as Tiamat's cry when she was at the Mesopotamian singularity. However, it was different from the aggressive song from before. This time, the song contained the great love of a mother, and was not aggressive at all. Wu Ming, who heard this song, felt as if he had been fed a hangover soup. Wu Ming, who was still indulging in motherly love, became extremely clear-headed at this moment. He also understood that Tiamat was helping him. First, she used her motherly love to remove the pain caused by the erosion of the black root mud. Then, she used her song to wake Wu Ming up at this moment. In this way, Wu Ming could concentrate on his research and explore his goal. Wu Ming's eyes were clear as he looked at Tiamat's slender arms that reached out from his shoulders and wrapped around his neck. He smiled. It seems that this mother is set on. Tiamat's behavior made Wu Ming's impression of Tiamat rise to the maximum. Previously, Wu Ming was still considering whether to deny Tiamat as his mother, but now it was confirmed. After that, Wu Ming closed his eyes. He had to hurry up and see if he made the right bet. Wu Ming focused his consciousness on his body and saw the inside of his body. The black substance was spreading little by little from his heart to all parts of his body. The black substance was the black root mud that entered Wu Ming's body. Wu Ming's hand that was originally pressed on his heart had already been put down. Because the black root mud knew that once it left his body, it would be eliminated. Therefore, it entered Wu Ming's body through his heart, and spread at a speed visible to the naked eye, eroding Wu Ming's body. At this rate, Wu Ming's entire body would be occupied by the black root mud in a few minutes. Once the black root mud completely occupied Wu Ming's body, who knew what would happen? Wu Ming was willing to gamble, because he had insurance. He would not put himself in mortal danger in the gamble. In the next second, a large amount of white substance appeared out of thin air in Wu Ming's body, and began to fight against the black substance. This white substance was the origin power. Chapter 1046. Any part of Wu Ming's body could produce origin power, which was why it could appear out of thin air inside Wu Ming's body and fight against the black substance that represented the origin black mud. Origin power was Wu Ming's insurance. Wu Ming consciously controlled the birth and death of origin power, constantly mixing it with the origin black mud. The white substance and the black substance were like two countries at war, going back and forth, one taking over one side, the other taking over the other. In the end, the origin black mud and origin power each took over half of Wu Ming's body. It wasn't a case of you taking up the left and me taking up the right, or you taking up the top and me taking up the bottom. Instead, it was a mixture of you and me. At this moment, Wu Ming's body was filled with black and white substances. Black and white were constantly changing, and finally, the origin black mud and origin power were fighting against each other. However, this wasn't enough. The origin black mud wasn't in its home ground, and it was caught off guard by the origin power. All of its thoughts were focused on resisting the origin power. As a result, the corrosion of the origin black mud on Wu Ming's body weakened. He hadn't obtained anything from the corrosion earlier, and now that the corrosion had weakened, wouldn't it be even harder to obtain the secret? And so, Wu Ming came up with an idea. Wu Ming controlled the origin power and consciously guided the origin black mud through his body again and again. In just a few breaths' time, the origin black mud had completely covered Wu Ming's body, leaving nothing behind. However, what Wu Ming imagined didn't happen. Not only that, nothing happened at all. Nothing happened? Wu Ming was at a loss. Could it be that his gamble was wrong? Refusing to believe it, Wu Ming once again controlled the origin black mud to flow through his body, but the result was still fruitless. This is troublesome. Wu Ming felt a bit irritated. Wu Ming's goal was not to find the secret of adulthood and become stronger, but to kill Gidia, protect the world between worlds and protect Chaldea. However, this method did not seem to achieve the goal of killing Gidia, protecting the various worlds and Chaldea. That was why Wu Ming was frustrated. It seemed that Wuming had made a wrong bet this time. In that case, Wuming needed to think of other ways to get through this difficult situation. After all, not only did he want to protect the worlds in between from harm, but he also wanted to take back Chaldea from Gidia, and he also had to kill Gidia. The difficulty of combining the three into one was extraordinarily high. Looks like I have to work on that first. No matter what, they had to destroy the launcher of the anthropoid cannon first. This was the most important thing. Only in this way could the worlds in between be safe and sound. Then he had to deal a heavy blow to Gidia, take back Chaldea from Gidia, and then completely destroy Gidia. This needed to be done in one go, and the difficulty was not ordinary. After all, Wuming did not know how fast the launcher of the man-made cannons, which were the clusters of trees that looked like withered branches, could recover. He also did not know if Gidia's launcher was the only one that could release the man-made cannons. Wuming also did not know where Gidia hid Chaldea. Even more, Wuming did not know if Gidia had any trump cards. In short, this was not an easy task. However, just as Wuming was thinking, he did not notice that the black origin mud was slowly assimilating with the origin power in Wuming's body. The pain that he had adapted to gradually disappeared. Wuming, who was unaware of all this, left Tiamat's embrace and turned to look at Tiamat. Tiamat did not know why Wuming wanted to leave her embrace, but Tiamat did not need to know. She just looked at Wuming silently, her starry eyes filled with motherly love for Wuming. Seeing Tiamat like this, Wuming did not know what to say for a moment. The words of gratitude that he wanted to express were also stuck in his mouth. Tiamat completely treated Wuming as her son, but Wuming was not used to treating Tiamat as his mother. Tiamat helped him just now, so he should naturally thank Tiamat. However, Wuming felt that once he opened his mouth, Tiamat would become unhappy. After all, parents who truly loved their children did not ask for anything in return. Wuming was worried that Tiamat would think that Wuming was treating her as an outsider and feel sad. Anyway, Wuming was quite conflicted now. Looking at Tiamat's pink starry eyes, Wuming finally decided to thank her. However, before Wuming could finish his sentence, Tiamat seemed to have seen through Wuming's intentions. She happily hugged Wuming in her arms and kept muttering, "Child, child." Tiamat's expression at the moment looked quite happy, and Wuming was currently buried in Tiamat's bosom, which was filled with motherly love, so he could not speak for a while. After exerting a tremendous amount of effort, Wuming finally left Tiamat's embrace. After persuading Tiamat in every possible way, he made Tiamat obediently sit on the side, and then Wuming walked towards Enkidu. "I made the wrong bet. I have to find another way to deal with Gidia." Wuming told Enkidu and Kalis about what he had just experienced. At the same time, Wuming also told the two of them about his plan to remedy the situation. "Master, is it okay for that thing to stay in your body?" Kalis was referring to the black origin soil in Wuming's body. "I can't get rid of it for a while, but with the protection of the origin energy, the black origin soil can't do anything else." After all, it had already penetrated deep into Wuming's body, and could not be instantly removed by the origin energy. However, it was not difficult to completely remove it, but it was not something that could be completely removed in a short period of time. After all, with the origin energy, it would not affect Wuming much for a while, and the pain from the black origin soil was almost gone. Therefore, Wuming decided to deal with the black origin soil in his body after he successfully killed Gidia and took back Chaldea. Next, he would need the help of Enkidu and Kalis to deal with Gidia. He would use all the power he could to severely injure Gidia and take back Chaldea from Gidia. "Use my power as you wish, Master Wuming." After Enkidu finished speaking, he turned into a golden chain and wrapped around Wuming's arm, leaving Kalis floating in the air. "Although I don't have the ability to attack directly, I will stay by your side and assist you, Master." Kalis flew directly onto Wuming's head and settled down. Then Wuming looked at Tiamat, who was sitting obediently not far away. After Tiamat returned his gaze, Wuming also calmed down. Wuming transformed into a huge origin dragon, rushed into the void, and disappeared. Chapter 1047. The world that was formed by a few clones was destroyed by Gidia. This was something that could not be helped. Putting aside the fact that Gidea's humanoid cannon had the power to destroy an entire world with the support of his origin energy, the world that Wu Ming's clones created was just a very simple world. Apart from the storm and the ocean, there was nothing else. There was not even land. Even if Silent's doppelganger tried his best to stop Gaia's anthropoid cannon, even if it was just the aftershocks, after a few rounds, this simple world would not collapse because of the aftershocks. On the other hand, Gidea's time temple was still intact apart from the jade throne that Wu Ming smashed with his claw. After all, the Temple of Time was King Solomon's second noble artifact. Later on it was obtained by Gaia. Now it was tempered, modified and strengthened by the power of origin. It would be difficult to destroy it completely. At the very least, if Gaia's artificial cannons wanted to destroy the Temple of Time, they would have to hit it at least 3 times. This was enough to prove how powerful the Time Temple was. Gidea, who had returned to the world, flew to the ruins of the Jade Throne and sat on a fragment as if the Jade Throne was not destroyed. Interesting, very interesting. I didn't expect you to be able to create a world. Gidea praised Wu Ming. No matter how simple a world was, it was still a world. As long as it was completed in the future, it might be possible to form a world that operated on its own. Facing Gidea's praise, Wu Ming's clones continued to pretend to be his original body. I've studied the inherent barrier. With my own ability, it's not difficult for me to create such a simple world. Wu Ming's clones were right. Wu Ming had been studying the inherent barrier since the beginning. The inherent barrier itself was a world that could exist on its own but required mana to maintain. Wu Ming's clones were originally God's powers. With this knowledge, it was not difficult for Wu Ming to create a simple world on his own. However, it was Wu Ming's first time using the inherent barrier to create a world. Compared to Gidea, Wu Ming was showing off in front of an expert. After all, Gaia's noble phantasm, or rather, the second noble phantasm that originally belonged to Solomon. The time to wear the crown has come to inspire all things as Paulina, which was the Temple of Time, was actually an inherent enchantment. It was a space that gathered and integrated the history of mankind that had been converted into mana. It existed in an imaginary space that was isolated from the usual flow of time. It was originally an inherent barrier, but it later became a singularity. Later on, due to the origin power and Gidea's control of the relic, it became a special small world. If Gidea wanted to, the Time Temple could undoubtedly become a new world. However, Gidea did not want to do that. That was why he kept the Time Temple in its current state, leaving the moon-shaped world, and coming to this world. Therefore, in a sense, Wu Ming was showing off in front of an expert. You're really strong, Gidea. Gidea chose the right battlefield and grasped Wu Ming's weakness, so Wu Ming did not dare to fight with all his strength against Gidea. It could be said that he had all the right time, place and people. Gidea had the artificial cannon that could easily destroy the world. And the battlefield between Wu Ming and Gidea was still between countless worlds. In addition, Wu Ming was also threatened by Gidea to some extent, so he could not fight with Gidea at all. If one were to simply compare Wu Ming and Gidea, Wu Ming's individual combat ability was very strong, while Gidea's was good at AoE damage. In short, all the factors added together were quite unfavorable to Wu Ming. However, it was good that Gidea's moves were simple, and did not have any strange abilities. Wu Ming could still deal with it, but if he wanted to defeat Gidea under such conditions, he still had to plan for the long term. In other words, he had to stall for time. Everything Wu Ming was doing now was to stall for time. Whether it was building the world, chatting with Gidea, or stopping Gidea from releasing the artificial cannon, they were all stalling for time. In order to avoid being too deliberate, Wu Ming also took the initiative to attack, but those were all harmless attacks that basically did not have any effect on Gidea. However, in the end, he still did not find any good way, and could only rely on force to break through. Wu Ming's clone had received the plan of the main body, and the main body was also rushing here. What Wu Ming's clone needed to do was to cover for the next plan, and make the best preparations. First, he needed to destroy Gidea's launcher that launched the artificial cannon, the huge sphere made of dead branches. Glancing at the sphere from the corner of his eye, Wu Ming's clone let go of the blade of salvation, and let it float in the dragon-shaped phantasm around him. Then, Wu Ming's doppelganger raised a hand and chanted, "For victory, come to me quickly. Immortal son, please give me a shining steed. O spirited horse, with the lifeline of my origin dragon, I bestow upon the eternal glory. Bring forth my radiant wheel of light." Wu Ming's clone suddenly emitted light. In this universe-like world, it was like a sun. This was an enhanced version of the spirit that could double the power of the sun incarnation. A star appeared in front of Gitya. The light made Gitya unable to open his eyes for a while, although Wu Ming's clone did not know whether Gitya had eyes or not. The next second, the star rushed to Gitya. What? Gaia stood up from the jade throne fragment in the face of the star that was rushing towards her. She looked surprised. The reason was very simple. Regardless of whether Gitya was threatening him or not, Chaldea was on Gitya's side. If Gitya did not protect Chaldea, Chaldea would definitely be destroyed under the impact of this star. Did the other party not care about Chaldea's safety? Just as Gitya mobilized the demon god pillar and prepared to defend, the huge star suddenly flickered and disappeared. No, it didn't disappear. Gaia could feel that her back was burning hot at the moment. And the star did not disappear, but moved so fast that it teleported. The incarnations on Wu Ming's clone had not been removed. The phoenix incarnation was still there, but the burden on the body was not small. Wu Ming's clone used the sun incarnation. It seemed to be rushing to Gitya, but in fact it was aiming at the reloaded anthropoid cannon behind Gitya. The star came into contact with the launcher of the anthropoid cannon, and the next second, thunder, hurricane, vortex, and undercurrent full of destruction all exploded in the star. And in this way, the whole star, that was originally stable, exploded. Chapter 1048. Wu Ming's clone used his various avatars as ammunition to detonate the sun avatar, using it as a bomb, to explode behind Gitya. He wanted to destroy the artificial cannon's launcher, which was the cluster of branches. Without a doubt, Wu Ming's clone succeeded. After the violent explosion, the smoke and dust dispersed. Gitya had already been protected by the demon god pillars, preventing him from being affected by the explosion. Although it was an attack aimed at the artificial cannon's launcher, it also contained the power of the source. The aftermath was enough to make Gitya suffer, so he had to be on guard. Because the explosion had ended, only a few demon god pillars remained. The barrier dissipated, and Gitya's figure reappeared. Because it was just too powerful. And with the suppression of the power of the source, the demon god pillars did not have the time to split and grow. Just then, all the demon god pillars stood in front of Gitya, but even so, only a few demon god pillars remained. However, the demon god pillars successfully protected Gitya, not letting Gitya suffer any damage. And as long as there was a demon god pillar, and as long as Gitya existed, the 72 demon god pillars would regenerate. However, the few fragments left behind by the Jade Throne had basically all shattered. As for Wu Ming's clone's target, the artificial cannon's launcher, it had disappeared. In Gitya's senses, the artificial cannon's launcher had been destroyed by Wu Ming in the explosion of the star just now. That's self-destruction, right? The explosion of the star just now was without a doubt self-destruction. Otherwise, how could it be so powerful? If Wu Ming really had such a powerful move, he could have used it right from the start. Why would he waste so much time with Gitya? However, why would he self-destruct? Even Gitya did not expect Wu Ming to choose to self-destruct. After all, no matter who stood in Wu Ming's perspective, no one would do that, right? After all, Gitya's goal was to kill Wu Ming. His self-destruction was what Gitya wanted, but Wu Ming should have aimed at Gitya before self-destructing. Also, was Wu Ming going to die just like that? That was too ridiculous. Even Gitya would not believe it. Then what was going on? Just as Gitya was thinking, a meteor streaked across the cosmos like sky between worlds. The meteor's target was Gitya. When the meteor was still a long distance away from Gaia, Gaia discovered the meteor's tracks. After all, it was too strange for a meteor to appear at this time. Was this Wu Ming's trump card? However, the star that Wu Ming had just created had indeed self-destructed. Gitya could clearly sense Wu Ming's aura disappearing bit by bit. Is this a unique phenomenon between worlds? Gideon decided to observe for now. However, just as Gideon was thinking, the meteor arrived before Gideon in an instant. It was not a meteor. It was Wuming in his huge dragon form. Roar! Wuming roared furiously and swiped at Gideon with his claws imbued with the power of origin. Because the demon god pillars had not fully recovered, a few demon god pillars could not block the claw imbued with the power of origin. Rip! Immediately, the demon god pillars were severed and Gideon was sent flying. Wuming's figure stopped where Gideon was originally. With a swipe of his claws, he shattered the demon god pillars that had been severed into pieces and disappeared. He had to destroy all of the demon god pillars while there were only a few left. The demon god pillar's recovery speed was suppressed by the power of origin. Now, Gideon did not have a single demon god pillar that he could use. And Gideon was finally injured by Wuming. Gaia, who had been sent flying, steadied herself and touched her chest. An extremely exaggerated wound stretched from Gideon's shoulder to his waist. A piercing pain surged into Gideon's head. Before Wuming's claws reached Gideon, the remaining demon god pillars protected Gideon, allowing Gideon to avoid Wuming's direct attack. As a result, this wound was not caused by Wuming's claws, but by the power of origin imbued within Wuming's claws, or in other words, by grazing Gideon. Otherwise, Gaia wouldn't only have one wound on her body. A blue figure appeared from the hole in Gideon's chest. It was the crystal ball that stored Chaldea's base. As Gideon touched the wound, the Chaldea's crystal ball fused into Gideon's body again. Clearly, Gideon had hidden Chaldea even deeper in his body. The sharp-eyed Wuming obviously saw this. So it was there. Now, all the demon god pillars had been destroyed and the artificial cannon's launcher had been destroyed. Chaldea's location had also been found. Now, as long as he took Chaldea back, Gideon would lose everything he relied on. And Wuming had discovered a new move. With a wave of Wuming's dragon claw, a dozen meteors flew towards Gideon. At a closer look, those were not meteors at all. They were clearly Wuming. Or in other words, they were Wuming's clones. And these clones were not as strong as Wuming. They were even much weaker than Wuming. So even if there were more of them, Gideon was not afraid. At the same time, he also knew why that Wuming had self-destructed so easily. Because that was also a clone. Just like the soundless creatures that were flying towards it. Mere clones. Gideon clasped his hands together and opened them again. Countless origin black mud spurted out from Gideon's palms like lasers. In an instant, a few Wuming's clones were hit. However, there were also clones that survived. These clones took the opportunity to approach Gideon. Immediately, the surroundings emitted a star-like light. Could it be? Gideon realized something. In the next second, several stars surrounded Gideon and exploded. This was Wuming's new move. Using the clones as bombs, he used the sun incarnation with all his strength. With the power of self-destruction, he attacked Gideon. Such a disgusting move was simply Wuming's signature move. It was a pity that Wuming had not discovered this point before. Art was explosions. Sure enough, each of the 12 clones was useful. It was just a matter of whether they knew how to use it or not. After the explosion, Gideon flew out from the smoke that had not yet dissipated. His face was full of anger. Perhaps he was disgusted by Wuming's move. Aren't you afraid of hurting Chaldea? Gideon was right. The explosion of Wuming's clones was not that powerful, but it was not small either. It was almost comparable to the gas explosion in Winterwood City. Even if Chaldea was in Gideon's body, if he really destroyed Chaldea, it would not be a joke. However, Wuming smiled at Gideon. The explosion caused by self-destruction is almost all the power of the source. How could it hurt Chaldea? That's right. Whether it was the sun incarnation or the other clones, or Wuming's sun incarnation, they were all driven by the purest power of the source. From a human's point of view, these explosions were very ordinary. They could not hurt Chaldea's defense at all. But for Gideon, who had the black soil, it would definitely cause double the damage. When Wuming slapped Gideon away with his claw, he clearly saw that Gideon was injured, while Chaldea's crystal ball was fine. Obviously, as long as he attacked with pure source power, he would not hurt Chaldea. Reducing the power of the explosion, and increasing the concentration of source power would not affect Chaldea much. This was the effective method Wu Ming accidentally found to deal with Gidia. Chapter 1049. You deserve to be called my enemy. Gidia was not angry that Wu Ming had found such a shameless way. Instead, he praised him. So, you should just accept your death, Gidia. Wu Ming's body was glowing. Its gigantic dragon body instantly disintegrated and turned into countless clones of Wu Ming. Each of the clones knew how to use the sun and charged towards Gidia. I think you're mistaken about something. In response, Gaia snorted with a smile. Even if my third relic doesn't have a launcher, it can still be activated. Gidia's muscles tensed up, and a large amount of energy gathered in the muzzle-like gap on its chest. The time of birth has come. I'll use this to correct nature. Gidia crossed his arms and suddenly opened them. Arsalmadal Salamones. Boom. Countless rays of light appeared from Gidia's chest and gathered into purple energy rays. Each ray of light was comparable to the heat of the star Holy Sword. The energy rays that were gathered by countless rays of light were full of deterrence. The imaginary number 1 relic created by Gaia, Ars Nova, would collect the energy obtained from burning human history and convert it into an attack before launching it out. This attack was the creation of Gaia's third noble artifact. It was used to correct all things, Ars Almadel Salamones, which was also known as the humanistic canon. The so-called launcher was just a dispensable tool. To Gaia, even if it did not have a launcher, as a relic that it had mastered, it could still retract and release it as it pleased. The third relic penetrated countless clones of Wu Ming and blasted into the distance. Once again, there was a big explosion in the world. Wu Ming did not expect Gidia's humanoid cannon to be able to fire without a launcher. After all, he did not expect Gidia to be able to turn the energy from burning human history into a relic. He could only say that he did not know enough about it. Thanks to Wu Ming's carelessness, many more worlds were destroyed by this attack. Ha 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 ha. Dragon of origin, you are too naive. Gaia laughed delightedly. It did not expose that the humanoid cannon was Gidia's relic. This was one of the trump cards that Gidia had left behind. Looking at the clones of Wu Ming disappearing into the flood of relic, Gidia once again gathered energy in its chest and was ready to fire again to kill Wu Ming. Silent Ming dispelled the dragon body and created a clone. He wanted to take the opportunity to pretend to be a clone and get close to Gaia to rescue Chaldea. Gaia had already guessed it. Although Gaia couldn't tell which one was the main body, she could just destroy all of the clones, and that would be enough. Die. Ars Almadel Salamones, the time of birth has come, thus correcting all things. However, just as Gidia was about to release the second relic, tens of weapons flew toward Gidia out of thin air. It seemed like they were long-range attacks. Gidia did not think that those things could hurt him, so he did not care about those weapons at all. In fact, the weapons hit Gidia, but they did not have any effect at all. They could not even break through Gidia's defense. There was not even a spark. However, in the next second, a transparent spherical light film with a diameter of more than 10 meters enveloped Gidia. What's this? Gidia recognized the spherical light that enveloped him. It was Wu Ming's defensive skill. It seemed to be a relic. Wu Ming had used this skill to block Gidia's attack in the beginning. Gidia had witnessed the defensive power of this thing. If Gidia were to release his own relic, he might not be able to break through the spherical light film. However, if Gidia were to give up on releasing his relic, he would obviously fall into Wu Ming's trap. Therefore, Gidia maintained his relic until he was about to release it. Since there was no blind spot in the defensive light film, Wu Ming would definitely make a move when he entered. It would not be too late to release it then. When? Later on, Gidia began to think. Could it be those weapons just now? Gidia had some guesses. This was a relic with a physical form. Moreover, it was very likely that it had mixed in with the dozens of weapons just now and approached Gidia together. That was why Gidia was enveloped by the light film. In reality, Gidia had guessed correctly. Wu Ming used the Manchala formation to release a large number of weapons and hid his paradox armor among them. Wu Ming believed that Gidia would not stop releasing his relic because of a few weapons that were not enough to deter him. As expected, Gideon was hit because of this. Suddenly, the 9 rings on Gideon's fingers flashed. The 9 rings left behind by King Solomon were not just for show. Even if they were almost useless against Wuming, they could provide Gideon with part of his wisdom. Gideon began to think again. There was no need for Wuming to get close to Gideon to take back Chaldea. Wuming could totally attack Gideon first. After all, Wuming knew that he could use pure origin power to hurt Gideon without affecting Chaldea. In the next second, a gap appeared in the spherical light film that enveloped Gideon. An extremely large flood surged into the spherical light film. The flood contained a large amount of pure origin power, and could cause great harm to Gideon. However, the flood would cause very little harm to Chaldea. It could be said that it was killing 2 birds with 1 stone. Seeing this, Gideon was even more certain that he had understood Wuming's intention. At that moment, the relic that he had gathered earlier was instantly launched toward the gap. Hundreds of millions of rays of light that were comparable to the star creation Holy Sword instantly blocked the gap that appeared in the spherical light film. Before the flood that entered through the gap could splash onto Gideon, the gap was blocked. Now Gideon thought that he had more or less understood Wuming's moves. If it was the same move again, Gideon was confident that he would not fall for it. Just as Gideon was thinking that, there was a fluctuation in front of Gideon. Wuming appeared out of nowhere and slashed Gideon with the divine blade of salvation. Swoosh! Bang! At the same time, the spherical light film that surrounded Gideon shattered, and Gideon was sent flying again. It was exactly the same as the previous scene. However, this time, Wuming had an additional item in his hand. The Chaldea crystal ball was in Wuming's hand when he slashed Gideon. "It's all thanks to you, Kalas." Wuming praised Kalas. "It's my duty and honor, master." Kalas answered respectfully. Wuming's goal from the beginning was never to attack Gideon, but to take back Chaldea. Wuming had indeed hidden in his clone for Gideon to see, letting Gideon know that Wuming's goal was Chaldea. After that, the armor of paradox and the flood, mixed with the source of power, were just a feint to make Gideon think that Wuming's goal was Gideon. Taking advantage of Gideon releasing its noble artifact and thinking that it had seen through Wuming's scheme, Wuming used all his strength to drive the phoenix incarnation to expand the gap and instantly appeared in front of Gideon, and finally succeeded in snatching Chaldea from Gideon's hands. The reason why Wuming praised Kalas was entirely because, whether it was the timing of Gideon's relaxation or the subtle operation of the gap in the light film, it was all done by Kalas. In short, Kalas deserved Wuming's praise. Ignoring Gideon, Wuming took the lead to check Chaldea. After all, Chaldea had fallen into Gideon's hands. Who knew if Gideon had done anything to Chaldea? However, just as Wuming was investigating the inside of the crystal ball, a demon god pillar suddenly emerged from the crystal ball, completely eating Wuming. Chapter 1050. The demon god pillar came so suddenly that Wuming did not even have time to react before he was completely engulfed by the demon god pillar. At this time Gideon, who stabilized himself after flying backwards, laughed loudly. "Ha ha ha ha. You didn't expect it, did you? Dragon of Origin. I have already released Floro's seal. I have been waiting for you to take back Chaldea." That's right. As early as when Gideon took back Chaldea, Gideon had already released Floros from the Holy Grail. The wisdom provided by King Solomon's 9 rings to Gideon was not that simple. Gideon's plan was inseparable from that wisdom. After Floros broke free from the seal, it had been lurking in Chaldea, transforming into Leviticus. While chatting with the people in Chaldea and persuading them to surrender, it was silently waiting for the right time. And this time was the moment when Wuming took back Chaldea. Therefore, the reason why Wuming was able to take back Chaldea was also part of Gideon's plan. In order to not let you see any clues, I spent a lot of effort to let you successfully take back Chaldea. Now, enjoy the feast of the black origin mud that I left for you. The black origin mud was Wuming's natural enemy, but to completely kill him, the first way was to use the black origin mud to continuously attack Wuming. The second way was to use more black origin mud than Wuming could bear to swallow Wuming in one fell swoop. This was like insecticide and mosquitoes. Spraying insecticide at mosquitoes, because of the airflow and other external factors, mosquitoes would not die instantly. Therefore, it was necessary to continuously spray insecticide at mosquitoes to achieve the goal of killing them. However, if the mosquitoes were directly soaked in the insecticide, even if they were not poisoned to death, they would drown. It was simple and crude. The first move was obviously unreliable against Wuming. After all, Wuming wasn't weak, so there was no way he could use the black origin soil to continuously attack Wuming. As such, he had no choice but to use the second move. Therefore, Gidia planned this conspiracy and gave almost all of the origin black soil to Floros for safekeeping. He only kept a little for himself to use as a means of attack. Gidia was prepared to use the black origin mud to devour Wuming and kill him. And now their scheme had succeeded. What a pity, Origin Dragon. I still can't forget the pain you gave me. I have to thank you properly. There was clearly something wrong with the demon god pillar Flawless's voice. It was meaningless. Flawless's brain must have become abnormal in the seal of endless darkness. One should know that Flawless was sealed by one of the 12 incarnations, the warrior incarnation, with the golden sword. That was the golden sword that separated Flawless from the concept of the 72 demon god pillars. The seal on the golden sword was a seal that transcended time and space. Who knew how long Flawless had stayed in the seal for? Although I can't punish you personally, letting you drown in the black origin soil is the biggest punishment for you. Ha 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 ha. To Wuming, the black origin soil could be said to be the poison of all poisons. Letting Wuming drown in the black origin soil, Wuming would undoubtedly suffer intense pain in both his body and soul before he died. There was indeed no punishment more severe than this. The demon god pillar Flawless kept squirming. A trace of the black origin soil leaked out from Flawless's body. From the very beginning, after swallowing Wuming, Flawless began to squirm. That was the black origin soil that existed in Flawless's body rioting. It was like a stone that was thrown into a lake. After Wuming was swallowed by the demon god pillar, Wuming's consciousness became blurry. The words of Gidia and Flawless were also intermittently transmitted into Wuming's mind. It couldn't be helped. This time, Flawless and Gidia really put in a lot of effort. The amount of black origin soil that Flawless preserved could be said to be beyond Wuming's imagination. Once Wuming was swallowed, he couldn't maintain his consciousness. After all, the amount of black origin soil was just too much. Wuming was suffering extreme pain in his soul and body all the time. His blurry consciousness was also caused by this pain. I've underestimated Gaia. Wuming's mind was in a disjointed state. Master, you can do what you did last time and transfer your consciousness to the backup machine again. This way, you can avoid the black origin soil's damage to your soul. Collis instantly calculated the answer. What about you guys? Wuming forced himself to be alert and talked to Collis and Enkidu. We can help you protect your body. Enkidu answered. Don't even think about it. Wuming interrupted Enkidu without hesitation. If that was the case, Wuming's consciousness and soul could be preserved. However, this body would be finished. This body that had lost its mental resistance would definitely be completely consumed by the black origin soil. Even if Enkidu and Collis stayed behind to protect Wuming's body, they would definitely not be able to block it as easily as last time when Wuming's body fell into the box world. In other words, Enkidu and Collis would definitely die with Wuming's body. Only Wuming would be left alive. I promised you guys that I would never abandon you guys and escape alone. Master. Shut up. Master Wuming. I refuse. Collis and Enkidu shut their mouths. After all, they knew how stubborn Wuming was. When it came to matters like this, once Wuming had made up his mind, he would definitely not change it unless there was a chance for a change. But now, a chance for a change was really hard to come by. Talking to Collis and Enkidu had strengthened Wuming's consciousness quite a bit. In other words, he could still hold on for now. There was no such thing as a dead end. If there was a dead end, then it was definitely because the person involved had not found a way out. Wuming decided to find a way out before his consciousness completely disappeared. Immediately, Wuming checked his abilities. Because of the black origin soil's continuous corrosion, I can't use them at all. Whether it was the 12 incarnations, magic, or magic, he could not use them at all. In the instant that Wuming gathered his energy to use them, the black origin soil would corrode the energy that Wu Ming gathered. Hence, he could not use them at all. Some of the gadgets and items that Wu Ming kept in his Dragonist dimension could not be used in the current situation. Naturally, the physical relics and weapons could not be used. They were all hidden in the divine blade of salvation that was one with Wu Ming. Meanwhile, Wu Ming's divine blade of salvation was already curled up in Wu Ming's body, not daring to come out at all. Even the armor of paradox that was created by Artoria to create a time paradox seemed to have lost its motivation to live, and was waiting for death. As expected, there was too much black origin soil. Because Wu Ming used all of these things, almost all of them had a trace of origin power. In the face of so much black origin soil, there was no doubt that they were restrained. Naturally, it was reasonable for them to be afraid. As of now, Wu Ming really could not find a way to solve the current crisis. However, at this moment, Wu Ming suddenly felt that the black origin soil's corrosion on him seemed to have weakened. That was because Wu Ming's pain suddenly decreased a lot, and it was still weakening. Wu Ming's consciousness also slowly dissipated and became completely awake. The black origin soil was gradually accepting Wu Ming, or rather, Wu Ming was gradually adapting to the black origin soil? Wu Ming discovered that the source of all this phenomenon was a small part of the black origin soil that existed in his body. Chapter 1051. For some reason, the black mud that Wu Ming had left in his body had fused with the source power in Wu Ming's body. Because the fusion was slow and Wu Ming was focused on fighting Gidia, he did not notice this. However, most importantly, the black mud that had fused with the source power did not pose a threat to Wu Ming. On the contrary, the fused energy even helped Wu Ming get through his current predicament. The black mud was still rioting, but it did not harm Wu Ming anymore. Instead, it even replenished Wu Ming's energy. Although it was slow, this was the truth. So it's only starting now. Wu Ming finally understood that this was the result of Wu Ming's previous attempt to use the black origin mud to summon power. At that time, it was probably because there was too little black origin mud. Now Wu Ming was directly soaking in the black origin mud. In addition, the black origin mud in Wu Ming's body, which had fused with the power of origin, had a stimulating effect. With these two factors working together, it successfully caused a phenomenon that Wu Ming had never seen before. This power seems to be the source power? Wu Ming sensed the power after the black mud fused with the source power, and found that this power seemed to be the source power? It is indeed the source power, but it's different from my source power. After the fusion, Wu Ming felt that the new power was the source power, and it was almost the same as before. However, if one had to compare it to the source power of the past, then the source power of the past was still underage, while the source power of the current source power could be considered adult. Could this be the secret of adulthood? No, it was definitely not that simple. After all, apart from the source power of the adult version in Wu Ming's body, there were no other changes. Could it be because there wasn't enough of it? After all, this had happened before, so Wu Ming's guess was not wrong. Wu Ming let go of his body and mind. He closed his eyes and allowed the black mud to enter his body. Under the guidance of the new power, it continuously produced new source power. Afterwards, he used this source power to cleanse his body again and again. Wu Ming's goal was very simple. Since the source power was adult, and Wu Ming's body was underage, would using the adult source power to cleanse Wu Ming's underage body be able to allow Wu Ming to transform? That was what Wu Ming guessed. No matter what, he had to give it a try. However, most of the time, the truth was just that simple. After being continuously baptized by origin power, Wu Ming's body had indeed changed slightly. Wu Ming opened his eyes and sensed his body. No matter how he looked at it, nothing had changed, but Wu Ming could feel in his heart that the current him and the him a few minutes ago were on two completely different levels. Is this the power of the great origin? Wu Ming's pupils had turned golden, and the center of his pupils was still red, but it was no longer wine red. Instead, it was a fiery red that was full of vitality. At this moment, Wu Ming felt as if he had just woken up from a dream. Many things seemed to automatically appear in Wu Ming's mind. It was about the origin dragon, the origin black soil, and the great origin. If the type moon world's origin was the origin of everything that gave birth to the type moon world, then the great origin was the origin of all the worlds that gave birth to it. Regardless of whether it was the world that Wuming had first stayed in, the type moon world, or the other worlds that Wuming had experienced, they were all born from the great origin. They took root and sprouted between the worlds, becoming powerful worlds that gave birth to life and flourished. The origin dragon was actually a guardian deity that protected and complemented the great origin. At the same time, it was also a guardian deity that protected the worlds that were born from the great origin. This was why the two great restraints of the type moon world had so generously allowed Wuming to cheat, open a backdoor, and even form a contract with him. It was because the two great restraints knew about Wuming's identity. If Wuming was in the two great restraints' shoes, he would have done the same thing. Although it was a cliché, the origin dragon was truly an existence that protected the stable development of each world. It was responsible for resolving the apocalyptic crisis of each world, and it had unparalleled power that could easily resolve a world's crisis. Although the type moon world had given birth to parallel worlds and used this method to escape the apocalypse, it wouldn't be a loss to curry favor with Wuming, so it had done so. As for worlds without parallel worlds, the origin dragon wouldn't take action when species changed or went extinct, because the world wouldn't be destroyed as a result, and new species would be born. It was only when an irreversible apocalyptic crisis occurred that the origin dragon would either appear with a certain identity to save the world, or it would directly take action. In short, the apocalyptic crisis of the world would always be resolved. To put it simply, the origin dragon was a so-called god to each world. From a certain perspective, it could be considered a god in the truest sense. After all, the origin dragon and the great origin dragon complemented each other. It represented the great origin, and the great origin represented it. However, even if it was the origin of all worlds, even if it was the great origin that transcended all existences, there would still be death. Existence was the embodiment of life, and this existence would definitely experience death. However, the great origin's death wasn't the usual way of death. The great origin's death was to enter a deep slumber, after which it would restart, after a certain period of time. If there was a word to describe this, it would be reincarnation. After a reincarnation was complete, the great origin would continue to give birth to new worlds, while the origin dragon would continue to carry out its duties and protect the world. By the way, the origin dragon that complemented the great origin would also die as a result, and it would recover its strength as the great origin restarted. As for Wuming, what he experienced was the process of the origin dragon restarting after its death. In any case, even if Wuming didn't work hard, he would still recover his strength after a certain period of time. Therefore, the origin dragons weren't a single species. Since ancient times, there had only been one origin dragon living in the great origin, and that was the current Wuming. This explained why Wuming hadn't seen a single origin dragon when he first came to the great origin. The origin dragon's aura that Wuming sensed back then was also left behind by him. After all, this was his home. In that case, the origin dragon that White Yiksha saw might very well be my past self. At that time, Wuming might very well have been on his way to resolve an apocalyptic crisis in a certain world, and White Yiksha saw him along the way. Although he knew the truth, Wuming was still worried. There was only one origin dragon in existence. What if something happened to the origin dragon while it was still in hibernation? What would they do? Could it be that the root of origin would create another one? In that case, the origin dragon in the past might not have been Wuming? Wuming was destined to not get an answer at the moment. Also, what was up with the black origin mud, the natural enemy of the origin dragons? Moreover, the black origin mud was currently fusing with the origin power in Wuming's body, stimulating Wuming's growth and giving Wuming new strength. Was this a natural enemy or a boost? Unfortunately, that was all the information that appeared in Wuming's mind. It was probably because Wuming hadn't fully matured yet. Either that, or he would only know the rest after returning to the great origin. Kalas and Wuming called out, "Master!" "Lord Wuming!" A golden heaven lock vaguely appeared on Wuming's arm, while the crown on Wuming's head glowed. The two were responding to Wuming. Although they didn't know what had happened, they knew that Wuming had survived the danger. That was all they needed to know. It's time to go out and end this. Chapter 1052. In the outside world, Gidia, who had rested for a while, sat down on a random spot in the time god's palace. Gidia had paid a price for creating a situation where he could kill Wuming completely. He had been injured by Wuming several times. After all, he had put on a good show. But fortunately, the plan had succeeded. When Gidia thought about how he could get rid of all future troubles, the pain on his body did not hurt as much. Next, we'll reach the root and achieve our great cause. Although Gidia was Wuming's enemy, his thoughts were also based on the great cause. That was why Gidia did not think that he had done anything wrong. At this moment, he only felt slightly emotional and perplexed because the great cause was about to be achieved. He was emotional that after thousands of years of hard work, he had finally achieved his goal. He was perplexed about what he should do next after achieving his goal. When anyone's final goal was about to be achieved, if he did not die, he would definitely feel perplexed about the future. Moreover, Gidia was someone who had no friends, relatives, family, or hobbies. He only had the ultimate goal of saving the world, through the burning of human principles. I miss the king a little. Gidia used the burning of human principles after all. It was just a magic technique. Although he called himself the demon god king, he did not have many subordinates under him. Although the 72 demon god pillars were Gidia's subordinates in name and treated Gidia as their king, Gidia was an amalgamation of the 72 demon god pillars' consciousnesses. When Gidia spoke to different people, he would show different personalities. This was also because Gidia was an amalgamation of the 72 demon god pillars' consciousnesses. Gidia could be said to be a loner. It could only be said that Gidia's relationship with the 72 demon god pillars was rather strange. Gidia was one of the 72 demon god pillars, but not the 72 demon god pillars. Gidia was an individual, but also a whole like the 72 demon god pillars. As a result, once Gidia died, the 72 demon god pillars as a whole would collapse and cease to exist. But as long as Gidia was still alive, even if the 72 demon god pillars all died at once, with Gidia's current strength, he would be able to summon them back. At the same time, Gidia was an amalgamation of the consciousness of the 72 demon god pillars. This meant that the demon god pillars were actually a kind of technique. The 72 demon god pillars were the same as Gidia's, both of them burning the principles of humanity. As tactics, once they achieved the goal they had set a long time ago, they would definitely fall into emptiness. This was because they were the ones being used, not the ones dominating. Even if they won, it would not change the fact that they were tactics. That was why Gidia said, "I miss the king." As for the king that Gidia mentioned, it was naturally King Solomon. If that's the case, why don't you go and see him yourself? Hearing this, Gidia was shocked. The demon god pillar Floros also shook violently. However, Floros was not shocked. It was because Wuming was cutting open its stomach. Poochie. After the sound, a hole suddenly appeared on the huge demon god pillar. It was opened from the inside. The demon god pillar, Floros, was like a deflated balloon or a frosted eggplant. The entire demon god pillar shrank because of this hole, and withered. And from the hole that suddenly appeared on the demon god pillar Floros, a stream of light instantly flew out. It floated in the sky and revealed a figure. It was Wuming. "You're actually still alive?" Gidia was in disbelief. This feeling was like, you clearly soaked a mosquito in insecticide, but after a while, the mosquito reappeared in front of you alive and kicking. It even changed from a centimeter in size into a monster. Who wouldn't be shocked? And after being shocked, Gidia became angry. The existence that you thought you could kill didn't die, but was still alive and kicking. Who wouldn't be angry? As for Floros, it was already too busy to care about itself. It didn't have time to be angry or shocked. Floros was like a fish out of water. Its whole body struggled in pain. Then, after struggling a few times, it stopped moving. In the next second, Floros melted and turned into a pool of black matter floating in the air. Wuming waved his hand and attracted the black matter. It integrated into his body, and a lot of new origin power was generated. That's right, the black matter after fluoros melted was the origin black mud. Wuming used it and absorbed it into his body. You actually assimilated with the origin black mud. Did you reverse it? No matter how stupid Gidia was, he could see that this was Wuming's trick. At this moment, in Gidia's understanding, Wuming was now in a reverse state, which was quite popular among the servants. The so-called altar. Wuming's pupils were now golden, and his pupils were fiery red, which was probably the characteristic of his altar. Otherwise, how could he turn fluoros into the origin black mud and absorb it? One must know that the origin black mud was like poison to Wuming. I just happened to get a new power. For Gidia's guess, Wuming did not give a positive answer. Although it was not a secret, Wuming also knew that his change was not something worth telling the enemy. However, Wuming's ambiguous words in Gidia's ears was admitting that Wuming had been altered. Come and try my new power, Gidia. Wuming shouted and waved his hand. Countless origin black mud-like monstrous waves appeared out of thin air behind Wuming, raised high, and rushed toward Gidia. This posture was bound to cover Gidia in an instant. Now Gidia also realized that he may no longer be Wuming's opponent, but even so, Gidia would not give up. My great cause, my ideals, the meaning of my birth, will never end with being destroyed by you. Gidia seemed to be going all out. His body trembled violently, and then began to burn. This was Gaia, the burning of human principles style, using all the power of the burning of human principles. My name is Gidia. Humanity burning humanity. Demonic King Gidia. Gidia's muscles were tight, as if all of his energy was about to explode. Then Gidia hugged his chest and clenched his fists. The muzzle-like thing on Gidia's chest began to gather purple energy that was so red that it was black. Gaia had gathered so much energy that her entire body was cracking. She suddenly spread out her arms, and the purple energy that had gathered in front of her chest, which was so purple that it was turning black and red, suddenly shot out. Third relic, activate. The time of birth has come. Use this to correct everything. This is my everything. Ars. Almada. Salamones. Gidia's relic was released at a scale that had never been seen before on Wuming. Gidia's body was cracking at an accelerated speed. Such an enormous amount of energy was not something that Gidia could release in one go. Perhaps, even if Gidia won, it would be overloaded and cause its body to collapse. Gidia was going for broke. This was a battle where there was no victory, and it was a battle where one's life was at stake. This was Gidia's farewell. And at the same time, it was Gidia's unwillingness. All of this ended as the unimaginable giant pillar of black-red aurora collided with the black mud that was like a monstrous wave. There was no explosion as expected. There was only a white light that was produced when the two collided. The white light seemed to have covered the entire world in an instant. Time seemed to have stopped at this moment. However, the most important thing was that everything had ended. Chapter 1053. An unknown amount of time had passed. Inside the root of origin, on the central platform, Wuming, who had transformed into his human form, was squatting on the giant dragon head of his backup machine. He placed one hand on the machine as if he was inspecting it. Magic circles appeared around Wuming's backup machine. Not long after, the magic circles disappeared. Wuming's hand left the backup machine as he stood up. That should do it. Wuming patted his dust-free hands. Master, is that all you need to do with the backup machine? Colos's voice came from the side. There's no problem. Now this backup machine of mine can replace me to protect the world between worlds. All of this started from, ahem, Wuming did not pay attention to the time. In short, it started from when Wuming ended his battle with Gidia. Just as Gidia said, Wuming had assimilated with the black origin mud, and Wuming's new moves were related to the new origin power. Whether it was turning fluoros into the black origin mud, or summoning a terrifying amount of black origin mud to defeat Gidia, who almost killed himself. It was all because of the fusion of the black origin mud and the origin power. Wuming's new origin power. Although he did not understand the theory behind it, Wuming was not someone who was easily confused. Everything would be clear when he returned to the root of origin. However, after Wuming defeated Gidia, He did not kill it. Instead, he kept it alive. As for why he saved Gydia, it was not because of Wu Ming's kindness, but because Roman suddenly appeared in front of Wu Ming. Gydia, who had lost all its energy and almost died, was no different from before, or even worse. Roman used his connection with Gydia to successfully escape from Chaldea. Roman's words were simple. "Spare his life, please." As for the reason, Roman did not say. According to Roman, he seemed to have obtained information about Gydia when Floros was persuading him to surrender in Chaldea. After that, after Gydia was defeated by Wu Ming, he used the power of the 10th ring, which was the ring that Gydia was missing, to walk out of Chaldea and meet with Wu Ming. Wu Ming gave Roman a lot of face. He immediately agreed to Roman's request, or rather, he agreed to King Solomon's request. However, Roman's appearance was no longer that of Roman Aikman, but that of King Solomon, whom Wu Ming had seen at the Singularity in London. After all, Roman had used the power of King Solomon's ring. Naturally, Solomon, which was Roman's original appearance, was revealed. This also meant that Roman had exposed the secret that he was King Solomon in Chaldea. When Wu Ming asked Solomon about the expressions of the people in Chaldea when he transformed, Solomon's face was subtle. Wu Ming, who did not expose Solomon's secret, ended the questioning and sent Chaldea back to the original world. The world's people also recovered because of Gydia's loss of power. Chaldea could be said to have succeeded in saving the world. Although it was not direct, it could be regarded as saving the world indirectly. After that, Wu Ming did not rush to return to the Great Root. Instead, he stayed in Chaldea to help Chaldea deal with the remaining problems. After all, in that world, people's perception was that they just slept for a year. Not to mention ordinary people, the clock tower would definitely ask about it. What could those magicians do to Chaldea, the hero who saved the world? Even if he used his toes to think, Wu Ming knew what they would do to him. There was no doubt that the servants summoned in Chaldea would be repatriated, and Chaldea would be disintegrated. Chaldea's instruments and components would be preserved, sealed, and even studied by one magic family, organization, and even the clock tower. After all, Chaldea was a dangerous organization that crossed the timeline, and had a large number of servants that could be regarded as weapons of war. Even if Chaldea saved the world, the magicians of the clock tower would certainly not allow Chaldea to continue to exist. Moreover, there was no direct evidence to prove that Chaldea saved the world. What about Chaldea's data records? Video records? Sorry, it could also be achieved by using magic. There were also many magicians who believed that something did happen in this blank year, but Chaldea only survived for a year because of the magnetic field. That is, he spent this period of time awake and wanted to take credit for it. In short, Chaldea would face a lot of trouble. Although it was said that Olga Marie, Da Vinci, Roman, and others would not be difficult to solve all the problems, but it was still slightly difficult for them to solve all the problems once and for all. Olga Marie's third method was not yet understood, so she was not the third magician. Although Da Vinci was omnipotent, she was, after all, a weapon recognized by the clock tower. After Roman became Roman, and asked Wu Ming to spare Gydia's life, he resumed his identity as Roman. With his temperament, it was impossible for him to let King Solomon appear again. Roman was just a Roman, the highest person in charge of Chaldea's medical department. These three, whether taken out individually or together, were not enough. At least, most of the magicians in the clock tower would not buy it. Therefore, they needed Wu Ming's help. Wu Ming went directly to the clock tower. In a room that Wu Ming often visited in the clock tower, Wu Ming found that person. Second enchanter, Gemstone Ankishia Zelrich Subian Ogu. Wu Ming easily met Zelik. Wu Ming even suspected that this guy had already guessed that Wu Ming would go to him for help. That's right, Wu Ming looked for Zelik to let Zelik help Chaldea deal with the aftermath. As the second magician, there would always be people who would give him face. Even if they did not give him face, Zelik also had a lot of connections. It would be quite easy for him to help deal with the aftermath. And Wu Ming also asked Zelik for a list of magicians and magician families who would definitely make a move against Chaldea. That night, he turned into something terrifying and visited these magicians. He bluntly told them that if they still wanted to reach out to Chaldea, the next time they would be annihilated. Finally, Wu-ming also tampered with the magic seals that had been passed down in their families in front of these magicians. This was a naked conspiracy. Those magicians who could not resist Wu-ming at all could only choose to compromise in fear. Now Chaldea had a very long buffer. As long as Olga Marie mastered the third magician, at that time, coupled with Olga Marie's status as one of the 12 monarchs, she would definitely have the right to speak no less than Zelik. The third magician was one of the 5 remaining magicians in the world. The other magician also had the help of a powerful magician, who could travel through time and summon servants. There was also a powerful existence who could tamper with the magic seals of the Clock Tower magician family. With these, there was no doubt that Chaldea would not be in any danger. Speaking of danger, Wu-ming thought of another thing. Kalas, I remember that there was an alien existence outside Chaldea, right? Chapter 1054. Wu-ming turned to look at Kalas. Master, don't worry, Enkidu is basically done, he's taking care of the aftermath. When Wu-ming put Chaldea back in place, he accidentally discovered an existence that could be called an alien. This existence was paying attention to Chaldea, who had returned to the Type Moon world. Ignoring whether or not the other party had bad intentions, they definitely didn't have any good intentions for sneaking around. Wu-ming even suspected that Gidia took Chaldea out of the Type Moon world to protect Chaldea. In short, Enkidu, who didn't think he was of much help, volunteered to take care of this matter. After figuring out the other party's identity, it was easy to let them go if they were harmless. As the Heavenlock, Enkidu was the most powerful weapon in human history. Adding on the fact that Enkidu had been by Wu-ming's side for so long, he had absorbed a lot of origin power, which made Enkidu extraordinary. Wu-ming even personally injected new origin power into Enkidu just in case. It could be said that Enkidu could go to the Type Moon world and call himself a god, because no one was a match for the current Enkidu. Any attack that Enkidu casually released now could be considered an attack against Suzhong. As for the alien that Wu-ming sensed, Enkidu wouldn't be afraid of it at all. That was indeed the case. Kalas had already said that Enkidu had already taken care of those matters, and was taking care of the aftermath. Since that was the case, Chaldea had nothing to worry about. However, speaking of worry, Wu-ming felt that the one he should be worried about was Kalas. Wu-ming secretly glanced at Kalas, who was floating beside him. The current Kalas was no longer wearing a dragon horn headdress, but she was still not human. The current Kalas was somewhat similar to rubies and sapphires, but the rubies and sapphires were pentagrams and hexagons with wings and bows in the middle. On the other hand, Alice was a transparent hollow sphere with sharp dragon wings. In the center of the sphere, there were 3 metal rings that rotated irregularly. In the center of the 3 rings, there was a little light, like a star. It had to be said that the current Kalas was very similar to Ruby and Sapphire. However, they were sisters, so it was normal for them to be similar. After all, Kalas' full name was Kalas Balit, or Lapis Lazuli. Like Ruby and Sapphire Saphia, Kalas was just Wu-ming's abbreviation for her. As for whether or not Kalas could become a wand like the Ruby and Sapphire, this question was temporarily ignored. By the way, Kalas, I've always had a question. Looking at the current appearance of Kalas, Wu-ming finally asked the question that had been in his heart. Now that I clearly have a way to turn you into a human, why don't you agree and instead choose this appearance? Wu-ming revealed a helpless expression, not knowing whether to laugh or cry. Compared to the appearance of a human, I still prefer the style of my sister's phone. Kelly replied in a serious tone. However, Wu-ming revealed an expression of, I knew you would say that. It must be Ruby who bewitched you. Wu-ming responded to Kalas with a gaze that saw through everything. And Kalas fell into a rare silence. It seems that I guessed right. Wu-ming sighed. It couldn't be helped. Who told Wu-ming to pick up Mayu in the past 2 days? More than once he saw Ruby give up on accompanying Ilya, and secretly follow him instead. Wu-ming glanced at Kalas again. He had no intention of blaming her. I actually wanted you to experience the life of a human, but since you like this appearance, we'll leave it at that for now. After all, when Kalas thought things through one day, Wu-ming could use the power of the Great Origin to turn Kalas into a human at any time. Let's go. The arrangements here have been completed. After some time, come back and check on it. We can proceed with the next step of the plan. Wu Ming patted Kalis, who seemed to be thinking about something. Yes, master. Wu Ming opened a golden teleportation door and directly went in. Meanwhile, Kalis was still absent-minded. She was thinking about what Ruby had said about bewitching her. Magical girl. Huh. Kalis thought as she floated and also entered the teleportation door. In Ilia's world, Showayu residence. A golden ripple appeared, and Wu Ming emerged from it. After Wu Ming came out of the teleportation door, the first thing he did was to look at the clock on the table. At this time, Mayu should be done with school soon. Master, I'll go and prepare to welcome Lady Mayu. After flying out of the golden ripple, Kalis directly flew toward the door, out of the door and out of the door. At the door, there was a surge of magic, and a rather expensive red convertible car appeared there. This was a transformation of Kalis. She had the ability to mimic. As for the size of the object she mimicked, she could do so with magic. Wu Ming, who was standing in front of the window and watching this scene, did not know what to say. Ever since Kalis transformed into a ruby or sapphire, Kalis had become even stranger. If it was in the past, Kalis would definitely not have transformed into a car for Wu Ming to pick up Mayu. However, now Kalis would transform into a different car almost every time Wu Ming went to pick up Mayu. Classic, expensive, ordinary. There were all kinds of cars. This even caused Mayu's friends in school to be amazed. It could only be said that Kalis was now supporting Wu Ming and paying more attention to daily life. She was no longer focused on combat. Forget it. I can only blame myself. Wu Ming sighed. Kalis' change might have been caused by Wu Ming's words back then. Wu Ming's original intention was to let Kalis live alone. Kalis probably thought that Wu Ming no longer needed Kalis. Although that was indeed the case, after all, the secret of the black soil and the root of everything was completely understood when Wu Ming returned to the root of everything after resolving the matter with Chaldea. Wu Ming had also entered the stage of adulthood. After Wu Ming returned to the root of everything, the root of everything became a little enthusiastic, as though it was welcoming a blood-related relative. That's right, it was enthusiastic. After that, Wu Ming also received the information and secrets that he needed to know from the root of everything. There was only one root dragon. If one had to describe it, the root dragon was the materialization of the root of everything. It did not mean that the root of everything could create a new one after the root dragon died. Therefore, the root dragon that White Yiksha had seen back then was Wu Ming. As for the problem of the root dragon's reincarnation, becoming weak, the root dragon would actually fall into a deep slumber with the root of everything, and would recover after a certain period of time after the root of everything's reincarnation. It would not fall into a certain world when it was extremely weak. In other words, Wu Ming's situation was just an accident. Chapter 1055. When Wu Ming was weakened from his slumber, he accidentally wandered into a certain world. As for the reason, it was naturally the origin black soil. The origin black soil was the dust of a dead world, while the origin black soil was in slumber. When the origin reincarnated, its origin power would naturally fall into slumber as well. During this period, there would definitely be worlds that were unable to save themselves and were destroyed, which was why most worlds perished. Since the origin had a lifespan, worlds naturally had a lifespan as well. The origin could reincarnate, but worlds couldn't, and worlds would eventually reach their end, which was why a small number of worlds perished. These dead worlds would then turn into dust and return to the origin. The dust produced by these worlds that had reached the end of their lifespan and died naturally wouldn't affect the origin at all, and could even replenish the origin's energy, just like how fallen leaves return to their roots. As for the destroyed worlds, they were much more troublesome. The origin was like a mother who unconditionally spoiled her child, fully accepting and taking care of the dust of these worlds. Firstly, the origin felt guilty for not being able to save its child, as a mother. After the dust entered the origin, it would fuse with the origin power, and the resulting product would be the origin black soil. Secondly, the origin wanted to use the origin black soil to recreate new worlds, which could also be considered as compensation for the destroyed worlds. As for why the origin black soil was able to counter Wuming, it was because the origin black soil contained negative origin power, which was also why Wuming was able to counter the origin black soil. The negative emotions of a dead world were left behind in the dust, which fused with the origin power and naturally became negative origin power. The reason why Wuming was able to escape from the origin and wander into a certain world was also due to the increase of the origin black soil. As more and more origin black soil was absorbed, the origin couldn't contain it anymore. Worlds weren't something that could be created at will, and even the origin needed time to recreate the origin black soil into a new world. Furthermore, the worlds between worlds were so vast that there was no end to them. The number of worlds that existed between worlds was probably more than 1 trillion, and as the root of origin and the root of origin slept and reincarnated, countless worlds that were heading towards destruction would turn into dust and passively be drawn into the root of origin, fusing with the root of origin and becoming origin black mud. Whether it was a few cycles or a dozen, the black origin soil was indeed being consumed and reforged into one world after another. However, as the great origin cycles became frequent, more and more black origin soil accumulated in the great origin, eventually causing the great origin to overload itself. Wuming and most of the black origin soil hence flowed out, leaving only a little bit of black origin soil in the great origin, the black origin soil that Wuming had seen when he first entered the great origin. The reason for the frequent reincarnation cycles of the great origin was actually very simple. It was caused by too much dust from the death of a world. The great origin would produce root of origin power to fuse with the dust, but as the world died faster, the great origin would have to produce root of origin power faster. This would put a burden on the great origin, causing the great origin's reincarnation cycle to accelerate, causing Wuming and the black origin soil to flow out. It was like a sealed water bag that was filled to the brim, and if more water was poured in, the bag would explode and all the water would flow out. This was how the black origin soil flowed between worlds, and some even accidentally entered them. It was also because of this that Wuming entered a certain world, and was adopted as a normal infant. Although Wuming now knew everything, this was still a difficult problem that had no solution. The only solution was to start with the creatures that lived in each world. The creatures that lived in each world would develop, be it through technology or magic, but once they reached a certain level of development, these creatures would seek to reach even higher heights, which was why they had already faced the threat of destruction. In other words, they would destroy themselves as well as the world they lived in, which was the cause of the destruction of most worlds. For example, Mayo's world was destroyed because of the Ainsworth family. However, because the M-shaped moon world had evolved into a parallel world, it indirectly resolved the threat of destruction. Even if Mayo's world was destroyed, the M-shaped moon world would still be fine. But in the end, Mayo's world was still saved by Wuming. Most worlds didn't evolve into parallel worlds, which meant that if the intelligent creatures that lived in those worlds caused a world crisis like the Ainsworth family did, the only outcome for that world would be destruction. However, it was extremely difficult to start from this aspect. Once an intelligent creature reached a certain level of development, it was unavoidable for them to explore even higher heights. This was a necessity for any creature that lived in this world. But the key was whether or not these intelligent creatures could adapt to the next height and control it. If they could adapt and control it well, the world would continue to operate as usual, and the intelligent creatures would continue to live. But if they couldn't adapt and control it well, the world would very likely be destroyed. So, how could one change the creatures of a world, and make them give up on exploring higher heights when they weren't confident enough? Wuming could only think of one way, which was to become the god of that world. However, there were so many worlds, and Wuming naturally couldn't do them one by one. Wuming was testing the backup machine in preparation for this plan. This was the plan that Wuming and Collis had discussed before leaving the route. However, this was still a big plan, and the route wasn't omnipotent. The details of the plan still needed Wuming to prepare, and only then could they rely on the route to complete the plan. Let's go pick up Mayu first. Wuming shook his head and stopped thinking about it. Wuming jumped out of the window, walked to the door, opened the door and got in. Your sunglasses. Kala spoke like an intelligent voice, and a pair of sunglasses popped out from the steering wheel. Wuming grabbed it and put it on his eyes. After all, it was a convertible. Wuming had requested that Kalas provide sunglasses when driving such a car. Then let's go. However, before the car started, the door to the front passenger seat opened, and a beautiful lady got in. It wasn't winter, but she was still wearing a white fox fur coat, and it was the kind that covered her whole body tightly. The lady flipped her pink waist-length hair and smiled at Wuming. Although the lady was wrapped up tightly, it was as if she wasn't wearing anything. Her charm was completely reflected on her face. Maeve, why are you here? Wuming was shocked and quickly looked around to see if there were any passers-by. That's right, it was Maeve. Chapter 1056. Why was Maeve here? Of course, it was because Wuming had discussed with the suppression force and asked the suppression force to bring the Maeve Wuming knew from the moment before her death to this era. This way, it would not destroy history, and it would allow Wuming to see the original her. Although it would be better to directly ask the suppression force to take over history, Wuming felt that it was unfair to Maeve. That history, that story, were all created by Maeve herself, and Wuming had no right to take it away. In short, Maeve came to the modern era, and it was the modern era of Ilya's parallel world, and settled down and survived. And Maeve's wish, in fact, as long as Wuming was here, Maeve had nothing to be dissatisfied with. Perhaps the only thing that Maeve was dissatisfied with was that Wuming could not be with her all the time. Maeve rested her body, tilted her head, leaned forward, and lay directly on Wuming's shoulder. The familiar body fragrance entered Wuming's nose. Of course I'm here to look for my dear. As soon as Maeve spoke, the surrounding air was filled with charm. Don't worry, I've already set up a spell to disperse idlers around. No one will come. After all, Maeve was also a druid. Maeve's charm could be called forced hypnosis for ordinary men. Even if Maeve was wrapped up so tightly, once a passerby passed by, it would be easy to attract them. Wuming, who had experienced such an incident once, did not want to experience it again. Wuming breathed a sigh of relief, then looked directly into Maeve's eyes. Didn't I tell you to stay at home obediently? You didn't listen to me again. Although it was a reproach, it was more or less flirting. However, immediately after, Maeve showed a hint of jealousy. You still know that we have a family, then why do you always come to look for your little sister? Could it be that you like her? At that moment, Wuming directly gave Maeve a knock on the head. Mayu is just my little sister. As her only relative in this world, I have to take care of her, don't I? There was nothing wrong with this. After all, Shiro in Mayo's world was still in Mayo's world. In Ilya's world, Mayu indeed only had Wuming as a relative. Wuming felt a little helpless as he reached out to rub Maeve's tearful little head. Besides, I've already explained Mayo's situation to you. Leah and Jahan can understand, and even Master Skaha agrees with my actions. Besides, how old is Mayu? Why are you jealous? Artoria and Joan of Arc were also brought to the modern world by Wuming through the same method. After the Battle of Cameron, Artoria was brought to this world on the ship to the Land of Ideals, while Joan of Arc was brought to this world a second before she was burned to death. Whether it was Maeve, Artoria, or Joan of Arc's injuries at that time, they were all healed instantly by the power of suppression, which could be considered as doing Wuming a favor. After Artoria and Joan of Arc came to this era, they were very well behaved and didn't ask anything. Because of Wuming, Artoria wasn't so obsessed with the country. As for Joan of Arc, she was just taking advantage of the situation to save the country. The current France was no longer the France of hundreds of years ago. Without obsession, the two of them listened to Wuming and lived in Winterwood City peacefully. As for Skaha, Wuming personally went to the country of shadows to invite her out, and even fought her because of it. However, Skaha wasn't surprised that Wuming could find her, nor was she surprised that Wuming would come to her. After all, Skaha was the first person to know about Wuming's identity as the source of power. The fight also dispelled Skaha's thoughts of suicide. The reason why a person would seek death wasn't because she couldn't die, but because she couldn't find the meaning to continue living on this basis. That was why she sought death. Wuming found meaning for Skaha, so she didn't want to die anymore. When he first met Wuming, Skaha had pinned all his hopes on him. As for the people he taught later, like Kukulin and the others, they were just for fun while Skaha was waiting for Wuming. Skaha hoped that one day Wuming could kill her, so she had high hopes for Wuming. She taught Wuming everything she knew and even threw herself at him emotionally. Not only did Wuming treat Skaha as his older sister, but Skaha also treated Wuming as her younger brother. As for why they weren't mother and son, well, after all, their ages didn't match. Speaking of mother, Wuming thought of Tiamat. Tiamat also came to this era. However, because he still couldn't let go, Wuming arranged for Enkidu and Tiamat to live on the other side of Winterwood City, one city away from Artoria, Jean and Maeve. That's right, he didn't want them to see each other. In fact, Wuming didn't want Mayu, Ilya, and Tiamat to see each other for the time being. The main reason was that Wuming wasn't used to having Tiamat as his mother. Wuming couldn't imagine what it would be like if Tiamat called him a child, in front of everyone, but it would be terrible. Wuming couldn't help but shudder. And the hand that was massaging Maeve's head became heavier. Maeve's expression became more comfortable after being massaged by Wuming. But Wuming's action made Maeve break out of her comfort. Looking at Wuming's unnatural face, Maeve was a little worried. What's wrong? Nothing. Wuming must be hiding something from Maeve. No matter how stupid Maeve was, she could see it. However, she still chose to respect this man, and she led the conversation back to the previous topic. Although we have a family, if you don't accompany me, I'll be unhappy. Artoria, Jean, and Maeve lived together in a big house in the suburbs. However, because the house was very big and there were many rooms, Maeve could only barely share a room with Artoria and Jean. It couldn't be helped. Maeve's temperament was slightly disliked by the two. On the contrary, Artoria and Jean were very happy to talk to each other, and they even called each other sisters. Although the two of them did look very similar, only their faces were similar. At least, the difference in their breasts was sometimes very big. However, Maeve had changed a lot during this period in Winterwood City. She wrapped herself up tightly when she went out, but at home, Maeve was still slutty. According to Maeve, in order to change a little in front of Wuming, and at the same time, it was also a foundation to build a good relationship with Artoria and Jean. And Artoria and Jean also saw that Maeve had indeed changed, so the relationship between the three of them had eased during this period of time. However, Wuming basically didn't see her. As Maeve said, Wuming basically lived in Mayu's house. After all, it was to take care of Mayu. It was understandable that Maeve sneaked out to Wuming. Knowing Maeve's temperament, Wuming didn't want to reason with Maeve. Anyway, he was not in the right, so he just let Maeve do whatever she wanted. It is indeed my fault. Then how do you want me to make it up to you? I will definitely do it. Wuming's hand touched Maeve's head again. Really? Maeve gently grabbed Wuming's hand and put it on her face. Her expression was quite charming. Of course it's true. Wuming replied righteously. Then, I want to do it 10 times tonight. Maeve's expression became more and more charming. Wuming even felt a little bit. Turning his head, Wuming's cheeks were a little bit red. Are you serious? The number of times the two talked about was naturally the number of times they should do it at night. On the night Maeve came to this era, because she experienced the intertwining of life and death, plus meeting Wuming, Maeve, who couldn't bear the loneliness, successfully took the first spot of Wuming. In a sense, Wuming had matured. And coincidentally, that day was also the day Wuming crossed the inexplicable threshold inside the root, and became an adult root dragon. By the way, Maeve was the same as Wuming. That was also the reason why Artoria and Jean started to accept Maeve. No matter how promiscuous a woman was, if she kept her purity for the man she loved, Artoria and Jean couldn't say anything. By the way, because Maeve took the first spot of Wuming, Artoria and Jean finally decided to attack Wuming at night on the second and third night respectively. Although Wuming was a little regretful that he didn't have three, for Wuming and Maeve, who already had sex, Maeve's request was nothing to Wuming. Okay then. Wuming agreed. After all, 10 times didn't sound like much. And Maeve also smiled. Wuming, who didn't have much experience, didn't know what 10 times was. But he would know tonight. Master, at this time, Master May should be out of school. Oh no, I'm late. Forget it, Collis, I'll go first. Wait for me here. Wu Ming urged Collis anxiously, and then opened the golden ripple outside the car door. You two. Be good and don't run around. After Wu Ming said that, he jumped out of the car in a panic and directly jumped into the portal. Maeve, on the other hand, rested her chin on her hands and looked at the place where Wu Ming left with a happy smile. What, as expected, my sister is the most important. Although Maeve's tone was full of blame, her happiness overflowed. And Maeve's smile was still charming, but it was also full of happiness. Chapter 1057. At the entrance of the private Suigunhara Academy's primary school. At this moment, it had been some time since school ended. Other than the primary school students who stayed behind to participate in club activities, there was almost no one at the school entrance. As for why it was almost, it was because there were still a few primary school students pacing back and forth at the entrance of the primary school. That. Mayu-chan, is your brother not here yet? Gue Mimi, who had a gentle personality, looked around cautiously as if she was looking for someone. Beside Gue Mimi, Mayu carried her little backpack obediently and waited as if she wasn't in a hurry at all. She was quite calm. It's fine. Actually, you don't have to wait with me. Although Mayo's tone was still cold, compared to how Mayu treated Gue Mimi and the others in the beginning, it was a huge improvement. What are you saying? How can we leave you here alone to wait? Yujinza Ryuko beside Gue Mimi shouted as if he was willing to die for Mayu. Alright, I know that Ryuko cares about Mayu-chan. Stop shouting. Ryuko is very conspicuous like this. Who knows when he will be targeted by human traffickers and be kidnapped? Moriyama Nanakuru beside Yujinza Ryuko narrowed her eyes and smiled as she spoke to Yujinza Ryuko. Human traffickers. I'm not afraid. Although that was what he said, Ryuko's legs were already trembling. Standing beside Ilya, Kurihara Tarika, who was silently complaining in her heart, sighed helplessly. By the way, with Mayu and Ilya's relationship, can't you let Mayu stay at Ilya's place for a while? Kurihara Tarika suggested. This. Ilya, who was beside Mayu, didn't know what to do. After all, she couldn't say that she actually wanted to be picked up by Wu Ming like Mayu. Brother Wu Ming said that he would come back to pick me up every day. I believe in Brother Wu Ming. Mayo's words helped Ilya out of her predicament. But if Mayu-chan's brother is really delayed by something, will Mayu-chan really have to wait here forever? Gue Mimi was right. Waiting like this was not a solution. Why don't we go to the arcade and play for a while? Play my ass. Kurihara Keihua clenched her fist and pretended to hit Yujinza Ryuko. Yujinza Ryuko quickly hid behind Gue Mimi. Gue Mimi was at a loss, while Moriyama Nanao Tortoise was watching with a smile. This was the daily life of the four little ones, and Ilya did not find it strange. However, Ilya turned to look at Mayu, who was silently waiting for her. Did Big Brother really run into some trouble today? Could it be Ruby's doing? Ilya recalled that Ruby seemed to be following Wu Ming and couldn't help but worry. I'll have to ask Ruby later. Ilya thought so. Just as the four little ones were fooling around and Ilya's thoughts were flying, Mayu saw something, and her eyes lit up. Then she moved. Mayu. Ilya was the first to notice Mayu's movement, and then the four little ones also noticed it. Looking in the direction Mayu ran, Wu Ming saw the person who moved Mayu. It's Big Brother. It's Mayu's brother. That's right, it was Wu Ming who lost track of time while chatting with my Fu. Wu Ming hugged Mayu, who threw herself into his arms. Sorry Mayu, I was delayed by something. Although Wu Ming's words were somewhat insincere, Mayu didn't care. As long as Wu Ming could come, she was already very happy. It's okay, Brother Wu Ming. Then Mayu left Wu Ming's arms and stood beside Wu Ming. Big Brother, did anything happen? Ilya also walked over and asked cautiously. Ilya always felt that Ruby would do something. Even if she didn't do it now, she would do it in the future. Ilya expressed that she didn't believe in Ruby's character. It's okay, I just met an acquaintance and chatted for a while. Wu Ming shook his head, indicating that it was okay. Mayu, Ilya, and the others didn't know about my Fu and the others, so Wu Ming could only explain it this way. So Mayu's brother made us wait with Mayu for so long. because he likes the new and hates the old. Yu Jianzi, who was the most lively, jumped out first. Don't be like this, Ryuko, it's very rude. Gue Mimi pulled Yu Jianzi's sleeve, looking a little embarrassed. Ryuko has indeed said too much. Kurihara Takika pushed her glasses, then looked at Moriyama Nanao. Moriyama Nanao, who understood, continued to smile with squinted eyes. But Mayu-chan's brother did forget about Mayu because he was chatting with others, so we waited with Mayu for a long time. Wu Ming smiled helplessly as he watched the four little ones singing one another's tune. In that case, I'll compensate you. Immediately, the four children's eyes lit up. Children were naturally interested in compensation, rewards, and other things. Only Ilya waved her hand awkwardly. Big brother, actually there's no need. Ugh! Ilya, who was speaking halfway, was glared at by Kurihara Takika and Moriyama Nanao, and immediately shut her mouth in fear. Mayo's brother is so rich, why don't he treat us to an arcade? As expected of Yu Jianzi Ryuko's choice, she couldn't forget about the arcade. Mayo's brother has been picking up Mayu in a different luxury car every day. Kurihara Takika saw it clearly. Wu Ming, who had returned from a business trip abroad, Mayu told the four children, drove different cars to pick up Mayu. Kurihara Takika, who was considered mature among the four children, couldn't recognize all of them, but she could tell that they weren't ordinary cars. The four children and Ilya also took a few rides, and Kurihara Takika could feel that these cars were very luxurious. However, it was very likely that Wu Ming rented them. After all, who would buy so many cars for no reason? In other words, Mayu-chan's brother is treating us to an amusement park, so what? Moriyama Nanao successfully cooperated with Kurihara Takika. As a qualified elementary school student, the two of them wanted to see how Wu Ming would respond. Would he force himself to treat them to an amusement park, or would he find an excuse to avoid it? This was a big test for Mayu-chan. Amusement park? Gue Mimi was shocked. This isn't good. Gue Mimi, who didn't have the same thoughts as Kurihara Takika and Moriyama Nanao, was worried that this request was too rude. Yes, actually we just need to go to an arcade. Yu Jianzi Ryuko, who wasn't as smart as Gue Mimi, was also worried. They were just classmates with Mayu, and they weren't related. How could they ask her brother to take them to an amusement park after accompanying Mayu for a while? Ilya-chan, say something. Gue Mimi looked at Ilya for help. This. Ilya, who knew Wu Ming's background, didn't know what to say. Wu Ming definitely didn't lack money. Although she also wanted to go to the amusement park, he was Mayo's brother, not her brother. Then let's go. Mayu made the final decision. Mayo's words stunned the four little ones. Since Mayu has said so, then today, I will take you to the amusement park to play. I hope it's not too late. After all, this is related to how long you can play in the amusement park. Wu Ming also made up his mind. Moreover, Wu Ming's expression didn't have the slightest hint of pain or anything to hide. It was as if he was deciding on something as normal as eating and drinking. Hey. The four little ones were stunned. Gue Mimi and Yu Jianzi Ryuko didn't expect Mayo's brother to actually agree to such a rude request. What surprised Kurihara Tarika and Moriyama Nanakuru was that Wu Ming didn't have any problems agreeing to it. Could it be that Mayo's brother was actually really rich? Pa! Wu Ming snapped his fingers, and two luxury cars instantly appeared at the intersection. With a turn, they arrived in front of everyone. This scene caused a commotion in the surroundings. After all, this was the entrance of an elementary school, and next to it was the entrance of a middle school. Moreover, the location of the private Suihara Academy wasn't remote, and there were many passers-by. In the next second, two drivers wearing black suits and sunglasses got down from the car. They looked like bodyguards. They elegantly and luxuriously opened the doors of the luxury cars. They bowed and extended their hands, inviting everyone to get in. The four little ones were stunned. Even Ilya, who had never seen such a scene before, was stunned on the spot. Let's go, everyone. Wu Ming elegantly bowed to the four little ones, dragging them back to reality from their stupor. Oh, However, the exclamations of the elementary school students instantly resounded throughout the entire private Suahara Academy. You're tuning in to the Echoes of the Heart YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.